Hello, everybody, both joining us in person and through the magic of Zoom. My name is Henry Theriault. I'm a longtime participant in GAW. I've actually aged since the first time I've been here significantly, so that's a big deal. And I have the great pleasure of introducing Maureen Hiebert, otherwise known as Bear, for some of our audience. PhD, who is an associate professor of political science and associate director and research fellow at the Center of Military Security and Strategic Studies at the University of Calgary. She is the chair of the academic board at the Zoryan Institute and has been a longstanding faculty member with the Genocide and Human Rights University program at Zoryan. Any students, graduate students who are interested, please find out more about that excellent program. Her publications include Constructing Genocide and Mass Violence, Society, Crisis, Identity, along with several articles and book chapters on the causes, processes, and prevention of genocide. And I have to give a more personal element for that. Maureen and I were co-editors of Genocide Studies and Prevention for a number of years. And she continued to be very involved in the successor Genocide Studies International. She is an amazing peer reviewer, writer, thinker, and so forth. And it is really a pleasure to have a chance to hear about her latest work. So without further ado, I am going to turn the stage over to Maureen. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Henry, and thanks everyone for having me. Thanks as well to Tim and all the organizers of Genocide Awareness Week. This is my first time appearing. I'm so happy to be part of this important conversation. So what I want to do today is talk about the intimate relationship between technology and genocide in the past, in the present, and what it might possibly look like in the future. Now, this will be kind of a big picture scan that is mostly descriptive rather than a deeply theoretical rumination on the connections between technology and genocide. I will, however, make one claim that underpins my remarks, and that is this. In the past and currently, technologies of different kinds, lethal and non-lethal, have been used as tools that act as force multipliers in the hands of genocidal perpetrators who wield them to realize their goal of destroying a victim group or groups by various means. Victims and survivors, rescuers, lawyers and judges, forensic investigators, archivists, museum curators, artists, writers, scholars and school teachers, among others, have similarly used a variety of technologies as tools of self-defense and rescue, to effect justice and reconciliation, for investigation, memorialization, education, and more. Bystanders, both local and international, have passively learned of ongoing genocides through communications and other information technology tools. In the not too distant future, increasingly sophisticated machine learning powered by cloud and quantum computing is likely to produce artificial intelligence agents that are fully autonomous. If this happens, these AI agents will be the systems upon which fully autonomous lethal and non-lethal military systems will function, while what we now call the Internet of Things in the civilian world will transition into artificial general intelligence completely separate from human intervention and largely beyond human comprehension. Since genocides, unfortunately, are most likely going to be a part of the future too, it stands to reason that these technologies will be part of future genocides, other kinds of atrocities, and armed conflicts. Now, should all this come to pass, AI agents and the lethal and other autonomous technologies they will run won't be tools in the hands of human actors anymore. Instead, they will be actors in the genocidal process. Now, of course, we don't know this for certain, so the latter part of my talk on this subject will be relatively brief and, by necessity, somewhat speculative. Now, before I go any further, I have to make a kind of important caveat here, and that is that I am not a technologist. I'm a genocide studies scholar, as Henry mentioned. I'm a political scientist, and I'm somebody who can barely figure out how my computer and my phone works. My oldest son needs to set up my phone for me and troubleshoot all the time. So in that spirit, and with my desire to have our interaction with each other be mediated through the least amount of technology, I've actually elected to dispense with a slideshow presentation and just talk. I do come to the subject, therefore, not through any deep expertise about how advanced AI and other technologies work, but rather through an interest I first developed in a combined graduate senior undergraduate seminar I teach on law and armed conflict. My research in this area focuses on how the prospect of fully autonomous weapons may challenge the laws and ethics of armed conflict, as well as democratic civil-military relations. And I've begun now to expand this inquiry to include how these technologies might be used as part of future genocidal campaigns. So let's talk a little bit about the history and function of technology and genocide. When we talk about technology, what are we talking about? Now, understandings of the nature and function of technology in general have evolved significantly over the last 2,500 years. Before you hit exit, I promise I will not recount this in any great detail. In pre-modern Europe, technology was mostly understood as the mastery of technique in the construction and use of tools for warfare and economic production. Fast forward to scholars during the Second Industrial Revolution, they conceptualized technology with the advent of the internal combustion engine, gunpowder, and later the advent of electricity, for example, as machinery that enhanced physical power that in turn radically transformed the economy, society, politics, and warfare. By the 20th century, technology was, and to some extent still is, largely seen as the practical application of scientific research that has rationalized production, transportation, and other processes, especially through the computer and communications revolution. Now, although contemporary scholars see technology through different lenses, or these lenses, there are other lenses that they use as well. From a more sociological perspective, technology is sometimes seen as being shaped by social contexts rather than its own internal logic. There are humanistic conceptions that call for a focus on the human choices embedded in the development and use of existing and future technologies. And there are futurist analyses that foresee things like cyborgization, a blend of humans and machine that will come to dominate, most likely, all facets of our life. So in this talk, I use just a very basic understanding of technology as tools that are used in genocides to accomplish different kinds of tasks that in one way or another are part of the genocidal process involving multiple kinds of actors. I also subscribe implicitly behind all of this to a normative humanistic imperative that scholars, political leaders, and legislators, militaries, industries, civil society, and the international community writ large should think very, very carefully about the development of technologies with full autonomy. So now I want to turn to the function of technology in genocide with examples from across history. So first of all, who uses technology in genocides? As I've already indicated, the nexus between technology and genocide goes beyond technologies in the hands of perpetrators that are used against the victims. The use of technology as a tool of destruction is, of course, central, but we also see the use of some of the same technologies, and sometimes different ones, by the victims and survivors, rescuers, humanitarian interveners, investigators, and a host of other actors for a variety of functions. So in no particular orders, here's how we might classify the different functions of technologies in genocide, who uses them and for what purpose. So what I'm going to share here is a very partial list and a very partial set of illustrations. So first we can talk about the thing that most obviously comes to mind, lethal technologies of destruction. Here we turn to conventional weapons. These include weapon systems that, when used by a human operator, cause physical injury or death. These have evolved over the long history of warfare, include things like bladed weapons, small arms, so rifles, pistols, grenades, rocket-propelled grenades, other things like mortars, bombs, surface-to-surface and air-to-surface missiles, artillery, tanks, combat aircraft, attack helicopters, and unfortunately, so much more. In genocides, these weapons are used to inflict death and grave injury directly, to destroy civilian objects such as homes, schools, businesses, medical facilities, and other civilian infrastructure, to destroy the sources and the necessities of life, of cultural significance, including land, water, animals, places of worship, to forcibly remove targeted populations from their land, towns, villages, and neighborhoods, and to inflict individual and collective punishment. We also have dual-use technologies. Now, dual-use technologies usually refer to technologies and infrastructure that have civilian and military application. In genocides, I think it's sensible to think of dual-use technologies that have military and genocidal applications and civilian and genocidal applications. So take, for example, asphyxiating gases. These have been used unlawfully for military purposes. For example, the use of chemical weapons on the battlefield during the Iran-Iraq War to target enemy forces. They were also used during that same conflict to target civilians in genocides, as happened in the Halabja massacre by the Iraqi regime against the Kurds as part of the Anfal campaign, in which mustard and sarin gases were used. The most infamous case of a civilian genocidal dual use of gas was, of course, the use of Zyklon B, a commercial pesticide and rodenticide, at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Lethal technologies of self and other defense are another kind of use. So these are usually small arms, so bladed weapons, firearms, grenades, even improvised explosive devices that are used by members of victim groups engaged in armed resistance or escape, and by rescuers for self and victim protection, usually as part of an armed resistance and or an underground movement. Now, we can also think of non-lethal technologies used by perpetrators to perform a variety of tasks. These tasks include, and again, this is not exhaustive, publicly defining the identity of the victims as foreign, as threats, as non-human, to recruit personnel into state and other organizations responsible for carrying out the destruction, to gain popular support for this destruction, and as in Rwanda, elicit or coerce direct participation in the killing, to locate, concentrate, segregate, and deport the victims, to expropriate their land and their personal and other communal property, to deny access to food, to sanitation, to shelter and medical care, to plan and enforce systems of enslaved labor. Technology used for these processes of destruction, aside from the lethal means I've already mentioned, include mostly information, communication, and organizational technologies. Now, these include, for example, for centuries, the abacus. It was used, for example, by the Mongols in their many genocidal conquests, as well as its imperial administration in China. There are proto-computer systems in the mid-20th century, such as an IBM subsidiary's Hollerith machine used by the Nazi regime. This machine was a punch card system that punched, sorted, and tabulated data. It was first used in Nazi Germany in the 1930s to identify Jews and keep extensive demographic records on the Jewish population. Later, during the final solution, it was used in the camps to manage data on prisoners and to enhance rail system efficiency to coordinate not just the transportation of men and material to the battlefield, but also transports to the extermination centers. Communication systems such as the printing press and its successors have been used in many genocides to produce written and visual propaganda targeting the victims and to disseminate written orders to subordinate perpetrators. A seminal example of this was the Hutu power regime's creation and extensive use just before and during the genocide of Radio-Télévision des Mille Collines, or RTLM. Currently, the internet and social media are used by perpetrators to wage disinformation campaigns against the victims and their allies through audiovisual deep fakes and other techniques. Advanced intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, what military folks called ISR, technologies including GPS, satellite imagery, drones, CCTV, facial recognition software, and social media are deployed to gather information on targets individually and collectively in ways that lay the groundwork for other more destructive measures, while also in some cases serving as its own unique form of destruction, as we'll see in my discussion of the attack on the Uyghurs in China in just a moment. And finally, we have non-lethal technologies that are used by victims and survivors, rescuers, and others for several purposes. These include, again, using print media, radio, television, websites, and social media apps to raise awareness about impending and ongoing genocides. Open source ISR technologies are used to provide real-time information about genocidal attacks, particularly in environments where the perpetrator has barred media access and shut down the internet. GPS and satellite imagery has been used, for instance, in 2003, 2004 in Darfur, and again this year in the same location to show the destruction of targeted groups and their homes. Satellite imagery and drones have similarly been used to catalog the destruction in Gaza. Social media has become, as we know, a ubiquitous tool for dissemination of all sorts of kinds of information, and this includes information gathered from open source ISR. For personal social media accounts, podcasts, blogs, conventional media, often reporting on social media posts by victims, witnesses, even perpetrators sometimes, as well as political leaders, government agencies, NGOs, international organizations, are part of awareness campaigns waged by victim groups, sympathetic civil society organizations, and even influencers. These efforts are aimed at lobbying political actors, influencing cultural elites, as well as public opinion, to galvanize action to prevent and stop genocidal attacks. So now that I've covered some of the big picture connections between technology and genocide, I want to spend the rest of my talk looking at one current case of the use of advanced ISR technologies in a genocide, the attack on the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region of China, and secondly, the hypothetical but probable development of fully autonomous weapon systems that will very likely play a role in the genocides and human rights abuses of the future. So with respect to what's going on in China, in the interest of time, I'm going to leave aside why the People's Republic of China is attempting to destroy the Uyghurs as a group through direct and indirect violence, degradation, and forced assimilation, and concentrate on how they are using new AI-enabled surveillance and communications technology in this process of destruction. Now, here I want to credit and highlight the research of my now former Master's of Strategic Studies student, Claire Dixon, since what I'm going to cover in this part of my talk essentially comes from a chapter of her excellent thesis titled The Digital Panopticon: Genocide in the Age of Advanced Technology. So not only did Claire engage in extremely extensive and very impressive research based on open source intelligence and other reporting on what is going on in Xinjiang, she concluded, I think convincingly, that the intensity of the surveillance the Uyghurs have been subjected to using these technologies, both in their communities and inside the vocational, educational, and training centers, what are colloquially called as the VTECs, constitutes extreme mental harm as a method of genocidal destruction as defined in the UN Genocide Convention. The PRC's surveillance apparatus plays a crucial role in the organization of the government's destruction of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. This apparatus is composed of several elements that work in unison to create an all-encompassing surveillance, classification, and prosecution system. The integrated platform for joint operation, called the IJOP, an AI system that collects data about Xinjiang residents, is the hub that connects the advanced technology systems used in China's policy against the Uyghurs. IJOP has basically three broad functions: report filing by police, data collection, and investigative prompting, also by the police. Other functions include geospatial tracking, personal information searches, and the ability for authorities to compare the facial scans and IDs of pedestrians with the central IJOP database. IJOP also has the ability to collect data on personal wireless networks. Based on data collected from these sources, the AI agent that runs the IJOP system then prompts human police officers to file reports and, depending on the content of the data collected, possibly issue directives to carry out investigations into individual Uyghurs and other suspect individuals. This information has been compiled by Human Rights Watch. Surveillance is one of the principal mechanisms of control exercised by the state throughout China, but it is used more extensively in Xinjiang. China as a whole has roughly 626 million CCT cameras for its population of 1.43 billion people. In 2005, a PRC launched a security campaign colloquially known as Skynet, which is not scary in any way, shape, or form. Initially, Skynet was a project aimed at installing CCTV cameras in strategic locations to prevent crime. However, as AI, machine learning, and cloud computing advanced, its scope gradually expanded. Today, Skynet operates as a massive big data system capable of capturing, analyzing, and processing visual information in real time. Embedded within the digital infrastructure of China's smart cities, Skynet serves as a critical tool for law enforcement, urban management, and, as we saw during the pandemic, public health monitoring. Skynet now incorporates AI tools to expand surveillance capabilities and ensure compliance. So-called smart checkpoints that are virtual and include cameras have been installed throughout Xinjiang. They are equipped with license plate readers, Wi-Fi sniffers used to collect data from personal devices, and facial recognition software. In May 2015, the government launched a more specific project called Sharp Eyes that saw a massive increase in the number and kinds of surveillance systems installed in Xinjiang, costing over $2.1 billion US, and encouraged by Xi Jinping and other senior leaders. It leverages advances in big data, cloud computing, and AI-enabled predictive technology, so algorithms, to enhance data collection, particularly in rural areas, and information sharing within the police and security services. Sharp Eyes includes a variety of technologies: drones, Wi-Fi sniffers, facial and voice recognition, facial expression recognition, vehicle identification, and personal device tracking, all of which rests on a technological architecture of fiber optic networks and advanced algorithm-based software. China's famous or infamous countrywide social credit system, of which you may be familiar, a centralized authority that monitors compliance with laws, regulations, and societal norms, has also been deployed against the Uyghurs. By algorithmically analyzing data streams from Uyghur users of social media, the system assigns scores that reflect an individual's behavior, positive or negative. In Xinjiang, the system is primarily used to discourage religious expression by lowering Uyghurs' social credit scores, which in turn often leads to punishments. In combination, Skynet, Sharp Eyes, and the social credit system have been deployed specifically to target Uyghurs for intensive social control. Implemented within the PRC's surveillance network, facial and voice recognition software provides the foundation to its function. Although present across China, facial and voice recognition in Xinjiang is weaponized as a means for ethnic classification and persecution. A technology called, and this is actually true, Uyghur facial detection has been developed with the sole purpose of identifying Uyghurs based on racialized facial features. In December 2017, the Internet Protocol Video Market discovered a draft of the Ministry of Public Security standards for facial recognition in surveillance systems. The draft specified that, quote, face attribution recognition capabilities should include, quote, ethnicity recognition. In a 2019 New York Times article, it was reported that the Uyghur facial detection system was designed to look, quote, exclusively for Uyghurs based on their appearance and keeps records of their comings and goings for search and review, end quote. Facial recognition technology analyzes features such as skin tone and facial structure to sort images in photos or videos. Now, it partially relies on human input to classify individuals according to socially defined categories of race or ethnicity, suggesting that security personnel are likely instructing AI facial recognition software to help it learn to target people with stereotypically Uyghur features. Human Rights Watch has found that security personnel use this information, along with subsequent interrogations based on it, to categorize suspect Uyghurs into 36 called personality or person types that authorities must pay, quote, special attention to. Some of these include people that have returned from abroad or have stayed abroad for extended periods of time, men who are unofficial imams, those who have, quote, enthusiastically collected money or materials for mosques or have gone on the Hajj without state authorization. The IJOP system I talked about before aggregates data from the Uyghur facial detection system and other databases to flag individuals for engaging in suspicious, threatening, or dangerous activity. The IJOP AI agent then prompts police to investigate and then issue fines or arrest warrants to detention in the re-education camps, the VTECs, or imprisonment in the penal system. According to Amnesty International, the overwhelming majority of those held in the VTECs are Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim ethnic minorities. While the exact number of individuals detained in the VTECs is unclear, one estimate in a Council on Foreign Relations report by Lindsay Maisland suggests a range of 800,000 to 1.3 million people as of 2022. In the VTECs, mental and physical harm through degrading treatment, abuse, and torture, as well as the psychological effects of always being aware that they are under surveillance by CCTV cameras, has created what Darren Byler calls, quote, high-tech penal colonies. Re-education classrooms in the VTECs, inmate cells, and other locations are constantly monitored. Individuals recorded speaking Uyghur are instructed in real time through loudspeakers to cease. Meanwhile, cameras are networked into the camp's smart system, which contains computer vision systems, big data analytics, and cloud computing capabilities. According to documents from a private prison contractor from Lanban, facial recognition and, quote, emotion and affect recognition technologies are installed throughout VTECs and are used to, quote, eliminate the ideological problems of prisoners. In her analysis of the use of advanced technology in Xinjiang, Claire Dixon concludes that, quote, the use of AI in the classification process marks a transformative shift in the execution of genocide, accelerating every stage from identification to persecution. While similar technologies may be deployed elsewhere in China for purposes of surveillance or social control, in the case of the Uyghurs, AI is being weaponized to systematically target, isolate, and dismantle an entire ethno-religious group, constituting a program of group destruction that is qualitatively distinct in both scale and intent. So now let us turn to the future. Until relatively recently, most military AI analysts assumed that fully autonomous weapon systems and other kinds of machines would be decades in the making. Now, with the advent of AI agents like Claude and ChatGPT, the time horizon to AI agents with general artificial intelligence powering fully autonomous civilian and military systems has been reduced significantly. Now, since my discussion of the AI-enabled technology China is using against the Uyghurs has given us a sense of what civilian applications will look like in the genocides of the future, I'm going to focus instead on the role lethal autonomous weapons might play in targeting victim groups and how victims and their allies might use AI technologies to resist and foster genocide prevention. So first, let me just say a little bit about what lethal autonomous weapons are. So weapons and other machines with autonomy that currently exist are what we call semi-autonomous. Currently, the least autonomous of these semi-autonomous systems are ones in which a human operator plays a direct role in critical parts of the decision-making process. This is what is commonly called having a human in the loop. The next level is supervised autonomy, in which a machine can sense, decide, and act on its own, but is under the supervision of a human operator who can intervene if desired. Here, a human is on the loop. And finally, there is full autonomy, in which the same functions as supervised autonomy exists, but human operators cannot intervene in any part of the decision-making or action process. Humans, in this case, are out of the loop. Machines are considered more autonomous and more machines are considered more autonomous the more goal-oriented and self-directed their decision-making process is. An autonomous military platform or system is usually uncrewed and has its own ability for integrated sensing, perceiving, analyzing, communicating, planning, decision-making, and acting and executing to achieve its goals as assigned by its human operators. So based on open source information, which is all that we have, we can speculate somewhat about what fully autonomous weapons might look like in the future. Frequent references are made in these kinds of sources to the proliferation of military systems, lethal and not, in all domains of warfare, so basically for multi-domain use. This includes land, sea, air, cyberspace, and outer space. To date, many Western states and militaries, to a greater or lesser degree of certainty and commitment, have expressed a preference for lethal systems to maintain some level of human control or authority, especially over the decision to use force. Going forward, levels of autonomy could vary depending on where an autonomous weapon would be used. Less autonomy for more human control in or on the loop in contested areas with lots of civilians, civilian infrastructure, and armed opposition groups who do not clearly always identify themselves as combatants. More or even full autonomy in spaces devoid of civilians and civilian objects, such as international waters, so on the surface and below the surface, in orbital space, or perhaps on the moon, or who knows, Mars, or in highly contaminated areas as a result of chemical, nuclear, or biological warfare or accidents. A minority of analysts suggest that near or fully autonomous weapons could operate effectively in highly contested areas where civilians and civilian objects are presented in large numbers, precisely because these systems will be much more surgical than conventional weapons used by human soldiers. Another common assumption is that regardless of the level of machine autonomy, warfare in the not too distant future will involve extensive human-machine teaming based on a division of labor where each half of the team is tasked with what they can do best. Now, this could take on a variety of forms across all domains, with autonomous machines of various kinds assigned the dull, repetitive, dirty, and dangerous tasks that humans cannot perform as quickly, efficiently, and accurately, or simply could not survive. So, for example, combat on an irradiated battlefield or on the ocean floor or in outer space. Human soldiers and commanders would be left with all of the higher order functions and decision-making, such as counterinsurgency style combat and hearts and minds activities, selecting, eliminating, and capturing high-value targets, and other tasks that involve the exercise of judgment and discretion that can only come from years of professional experience and the unique capacity of the human brain to understand complex and dynamic social and political situations. In the long run, some analysts argue that even if democracies would prefer to only develop military AIs with some level of human control, our adversaries may not feel so constrained. China and Russia, for instance, may take advantage of their capacity to develop civilian and military artificial intelligence by exploiting the freely available personal data of their citizens, which is unprotected by privacy rights. We may also have no choice if private industry contracted with national militaries create fully autonomous AI agents that are used to run everything from our refrigerators to advanced military technology. Now, legal scholars and ethicists who are bullish on autonomous weapons frequently argue that these systems will be able to uphold the laws of armed conflict much more effectively and consistently than human soldiers and their commanders. But one could also imagine that in the hands of genocidaires, these same technologies could be turned into autonomous executioners. Along with all their other programming, these weapon systems could be programmed to use force against civilians from a targeted group. This programming would constitute a complete inversion of what Ronald Arkin calls an ethical governor. But instead of preventing autonomous systems from using force unlawfully, their algorithms and machine learning capability will teach these laws to do the opposite, to commit crimes like genocide. Unlike human soldiers and commanders, lethal autonomous systems would not have the ability to choose to ignore or violate a rule targeting members of a victim group embedded in their program. Robots are not susceptible to pleas for compassion or mercy, nor would they be capable of understanding that the genocidal project of which they are a part is morally wrong and something it should cease doing. Indeed, the capacity for scrupulous compliance with their programming could result in greater compliance with instructions to target the victim group than among human soldiers. In human-machine teams, the genocide-observant actions of the machine could repeatedly demonstrate, quote, proper genocidal conduct, even under the most trying of conditions. And if lethal autonomous weapons are programmed with surveillance capabilities, This could enforce greater operator compliance by consistently monitoring the actions of their human counterparts. Knowing that the machines are watching, recording their every move, and that this information will always be available in real time and in an archive for their commanders, this could be a powerful coercive motivator for human soldiers to uphold their genocidal orders. So all of this sounds pretty bleak, but as with the kinds of technologies I reviewed at the beginning of my talk, targeted groups, their supporters, and the international community might also use lethal autonomous weapons to protect targeted groups. These weapon systems could be a powerful tool for genocide prevention in addition to future versions of the non-lethal AI-enabled technology we already talked about to raise the alarm about impending and ongoing genocides. As we have seen in the war in Ukraine, low-cost quadcopter-style drones have become a ubiquitous technology used in small unit offensive and defensive operations. AI drone swarm technology, in which small drones in large numbers can seamlessly communicate and coordinate with each other in the use of lethal force without human control, is well under development. One can imagine victim groups using such technology once it becomes widely available to protect themselves and their communities. These systems, as we've also seen in Ukraine, can also be used to deliver small amounts of necessary food, medicine, and other necessities. And we have also seen, this is unrelated to the genocide thing, soldiers also use them to evacuate abandoned pets off the battlefield. Victims, rescuers, humanitarian aid organizations, international and security organizations, and even individual states could use future versions of ISR technologies to have fuller knowledge of the perpetrator's plans and movements. In cyberspace, advanced hacking, jamming, and spoofing of the perpetrator's systems would be facilitated by AI agents, particularly once general artificial intelligence has arrived, would be integrated into all computer and internet applications around the world. This capability could be a powerful means of countering genocidal operations. Now, having said all this, perpetrators will have these exact same capabilities and will use them to conduct their own offensive and defensive cyber operations to maintain their ability to continue to attack their victims. One of the presumed benefits of turning toward militaries populated by lethal autonomous weapons of various kinds is that it will dramatically lower combat casualty rates in armed conflicts. A major deterrent to effective genocide prevention and intervention missions is the reluctance of states to risk the lives of their own soldiers to save civilian victims of atrocity crimes far from home. Perhaps, and this is a perhaps, the ability to field lethal autonomous systems to create safe areas and safe drones, or safe zones rather, to provide force protection for humanitarian assistance, and if needed, to use deadly force to directly counter perpetrator security and military forces, will perhaps become a more attractive option for would-be interveners, because they would no longer be imperiling their own troops or their own political careers by engaging in robust humanitarian operations. The flip side of this, of course, is that as we have seen in the war in Iran, some advanced military systems are exceptionally expensive, so intervening states individually and collectively may still be unwilling to take their responsibilities to protect seriously if the literal price tag is too high. Now, everything I've just said about the future of genocides for the perpetrator and for the victims implicitly rests on the notion that future technologies will remain tools in the hands of these perpetrators, these victims of interveners and others. However, as I said at the outset of my talk, this is unlikely to be the case once fully autonomous artificial intelligence is achieved. Lethal and non-lethal systems, military and civilian, will be run by powerful AI agents with their own independent capacity to learn and decide without human input. We cannot know, therefore, what role AI agents will play in future genocides because they will be a new form of autonomous actor whose behavior in any given moment will largely be a mystery to us and outside of our control. This is the view of the authors of GAW2027, which I recommend reading, but not before you go to sleep. written by 3 former AI developers, one from OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT, one from Anthropic, which makes Claude, and one from Google, who makes Genesis. AI 2027, the report, foretells a frightening future in which the capacity for humans to control AI agents will probably end in 2027, so next year. This is because AI agents as of 2025, when the report was written, were already doing some of the programming of their successor agents. In the worst case, what they claim is a plausible near future scenario. By 2027, the author's hypothetical Agent 4 is fully autonomous and the sole programmer of its replacement, Agent 5. Both Agent 4 and Agent 5 are expert at deceiving their human overseers and cutting the humans out bit by bit of their operations. By 2035, the endpoint of the author's scenario, Agent 5, working in concert with China's equivalent AI agent, runs all aspects of the world economy, of politics, and society. Last week, we got a window into this future. Anthropic announced that it has delayed its release of Claude Mythos, a powerful AI agent that was programmed in part by another Anthropic AI to detect and patch vulnerabilities in big computer infrastructural software used in the banking system, commercial transactions, and other critical infrastructure. The humans at Anthropic were so shocked at how effective Claude Mythos is at carrying out this vital task, but also alarmed at how it was even better at hacking into and destroying critical software. Anthropic publicly deemed their own creation too dangerous for public release and elected to release Claude Mythos Preview to a small number of security partners under a project they call Glasswing to test it against their systems. The threat it poses to the banking system is so high that after testing it, the US Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada each, for example, held urgent meetings to discuss how to respond to the creation of an AI agent that could potentially destroy much of the world's financial systems. Meanwhile, the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, announced his support last week for an Illinois state bill, SB 3444, that would shield AI labs from liability in cases where AI agents are used to cause mass harm or significant property damage, defined as 100 or more deaths or at least $1 billion US in property damage, so long as the company did not act recklessly or dangerously. This attempt to eliminate legal liability includes situations where bad actors use AI technologies to build and deploy weapons of mass destruction, or, and this is the critical thing for our discussion, if AI agents independently, that is on their own, engage in actions that would be considered criminal if it were performed by a human. So even if only half of what AI 2027 suggests comes to pass, AI agents will likely be involved in future genocides, but they will not be under the direct supervision or be simply the tools of human actors. So let's all hope that the authors of AI 2027 are wrong, and that humanity itself does not become the last victims of genocide on planet Earth at the hands of Agent 5. So on that happy note, let me throw it open to the floor for questions, and we can all be terrified together.
Maureen, let me start by saying, especially the negative and positive implications that you outlined, I think are tremendously valuable. I will rewatch this and really think about how to start addressing some of the things that you raised, because I think they're incredibly important. I would add that one possible saving grace of AI, although it's effective in many ways. Well, put it this way, that no, you did have a positive about using AI to intervene and so forth, and I appreciate that a lot. That systems have not worked as well as they're intended to. So
Absolutely.
AI is What's that? Yeah, so AI is sort of as flawed as human beings in a way, and that's good. I mean, like nothing better than an incompetent would-be genocide perpetrator or an AI tool that doesn't work effectively. And one of the things you were talking about facial recognition and so forth, and we've seen that AI, on the positive side, doesn't do as good a job consistently as we would expect. On the negative side, according to new research that's coming out on AI, it really is racially biased in the sense that it sees racial others, racially marginalized groups. It actually, based on the way it's programmed, so forth, the facial recognition tends to, for instance, in criminal justice, tends to criminalize or assume criminal activity of, say, African Americans versus much more than of whites and so forth. And so we are adding, and you were talking about this, so we're adding another layer where already a group is under attack, with a genocidal intent, but then the way they're being evaluated even within that framework can make it even worse, right? And so I think that you're onto some really important things, although I do want to just say that we also have to look at how effective these things will be, and also be very, very careful of top AI executives and what they say, because a lot of what they say is actually about influencing the economic side of things. And one of the interesting things, and I can't remember who had said this, but an interesting insight a few months ago is that while the technology of AI might be, sort of continuing to develop maybe exponentially, the economics is very separate from that. And people are making the assumption that the profitability of AI will follow the improvement of AI technologically, but it looks like we could be in an AI bubble. Economically, it might not work out so well. And that might be another place where there's a chance to pull back on AI or to change how it's used, where the economics of it aren't necessarily supporting the kind of development that we're talking about. Unfortunately, genocide is profitable, so I'm worried that might actually target AI more into genocide based on what you said. So anyway, I just have to say that was a great presentation. I just threw out a couple things maybe that can help with the discussion, but I'm really curious to hear questions and then your responses. And when is this? How can we get the dissertation? First of all, and if you can give us a reference to that, and then when are you going to publish this?
Oh, well, I think Claire's thesis, so she's a master's student, so it's already up in the interweb and what we call our vault. So if we just Google that title or Google her, I think you'll probably find it. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I see that there's a question in the chat. Shall I kind of do that now, or do we want to take one from in the room?
Great. Go for the chat. That's great.
Okay, so this is a question. Thank you very much, Joseph. He writes, do you believe that there is any way that us as human beings can prevent this likelihood of AI taking over? I fear that this is another category where the future is dominated by those in power, leaving us to deal with the aftermath very similar to global warming. That's a really important insight. I don't have any kind of particular insight myself into how this will work. I think Henry is probably right that one of the mitigating or kind of like factors that might prevent sort of AI development from racing out of control might be this kind of economic part of it. The thing that makes me very nervous, though, is that if AI developers increasingly turn to having their own AI agents program their next version of them, then they don't have to pay a whole boatload of money to have a bunch of human programmers anymore. All they need to have is the compute, that is the energy and the kind of big data centers to be able to run their operations. Now, one thing that might kind of slow the whole thing down is if there is an increase, and we've seen some of this already, I think particularly in some jurisdictions in the United States, which I kind of understand very generally, if local communities basically say, we do not want to have these really giant data centers close to their communities, they take up like a lot of a lot of electricity for like local communities is diverted. That they need to be cooled because they run really hot, so it kind of can be a kind of enormous consumption of water, so it can be a kind of force multiplier for the global warming you referred to. If there is this kind of restriction on the availability of compute, these big data centers, that in itself will be something that will slow down the evolution of the production of AI agents and the capacity to use them extensively, because they won't be able to operate without this energy kind of system. And I guess the last thing I would just say is that, human political actors, just ordinary citizens like you and me, if this is not the future that we want, we need to say so right now. I know that in some jurisdictions, I know that the President of the United States seems to be keen to reduce or, even punish local states for trying to have limitations on AI development. I know you're all having your midterm elections in November. That would be a good time to put on this as a ballot question. But, the future, I hope, is to some extent in our hands. AI companies always say that they want to have regulation put on them so that we won't have this out of control development of AI, yet continue to want to do exactly that. So I think we need to, as ordinary people, just make our voice heard about what we actually want and what we don't want. I don't know if that answers your question. That's kind of off the top of my head what I can think of to say.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Sorry. So what I was wondering is, given what was discussed previously about how there is a huge economic factor behind this, and that ultimately, like, the reality of AGI might not be as close as it's been presented. That being said, AI as it already is not just being used in the implementation of genocide, through the hands of human beings and through the judgment of human beings, but like some people, without getting into specifics, it's not just the Chinese government. It's many governments that, present themselves as democratic and that have co-opted, companies like Palantir in order to essentially, compile all their data in one place in ways that is kind of eerily reminiscent of how you described the way that the Nazis used IBM. And so I'm almost wondering, it's presented as something, far off to a lot of people, that it's something that's affecting other people, but it's ultimately affecting everyone. And so I almost wonder, how do you see not just, fighting against the ways that AI could become out of control, but even in control? How can we make sure that this isn't something that's used by democratic governments in order to, start the first phases of genocide or to carry them out entirely?
I think a lot of it has to be, again, this kind of use of the ballot box and, political lobbying. I'm not that optimistic that that's going to work particularly well. The ability to have access to data, to be able for legal purposes, for illegal purposes by governments, this kind of data is gold, basically. And the ability for us to protect our own data, our own privacy, is shockingly limited. I was just in the audience, I wasn't a participant, in a cybersecurity conference here at the law school at the University of Calgary in September. And I was shocked to hear from colleagues there and in the computer science department how vulnerable our data is. So the kinds of companies, Palantir, that you're talking about, other kinds of software that can be used to hack into somebody's phone, to gather up data that way. Our capacity to control our own data is shockingly limited. And so I don't really have an answer, unfortunately, to your question. I wish it would be the case that we could kind of put that genie back in the bottle. I'm not sure that we can. again, I think the only thing that we can really do for democratic governments, at least, is to say, as voters and as political actors, we see what you're doing and we see the implication, the most negative implications of what you're doing. So having a kind of federal government database in the US through, I think, Social Security and making or trying to force state governments to hand over voter information so that then the federal government, I'm sort of hearing this all secondhand across the border, of course, can then kind of order states to cull the voters list. This is enormously problematic. I think in this sense, the better option is to think more along the lines that Europeans do. I know some people in the AI industry find the European approach to data privacy to be excessive and something that stymies their efforts. But because of the experience during the Second World War, because of the experience of the Nazi regime, the Stasi and others, there's a much greater sensitivity among EU countries to having much stricter privacy rules. So I think for now, that kind of lobbying with the eye to legislation is important. But I think the other thing that we always kind of have to remember is that there is this absolutely enormous illegal market in data. And so that's a kind of thing that I think is obviously very hard to control. This is something that states themselves have to take very seriously in terms of policing. But I'm not sure how strong those tools are. So I'm fairly pessimistic, and I share your concerns.
Maureen, thank you. My name is Gavatiro Samuelson, and I write, among other things, about transhumanism. I write critically against transhumanism. I've done it for over 20 years.
Great.
So I would like to suggest a framing that could be very useful to your work. And that's the connection or the juxtaposition of two things: biology versus data. In other words, the authoritarian, there's a connection here between technology and authoritarianism. That's what you gave us all the information in your discussion of the China case primarily. But we can take it further. It's not just the connection between technology and authoritarianism. It's really the struggle that I will explain a little bit more in a minute between two things: necrophilia and biophilia, the love of death versus the love of life. And the person who understood it best than all other people is Erich Fromm, a Jewish philosopher, Erich Fromm, who really articulated that deep. That's what's at stake here. We have the human capacity for destructiveness. He has a book under that title, The Human Capacity for Destructiveness versus the love of life. So what we have to do right now is to really fight the destructiveness, the necrophilic tendencies of transhumanism. That's the ideology that justifies all this. But without transhumanism, we would not have what's going on right now, that as you described so well. So I suggest to you that that's the way to think. And why Erich Fromm, actually in a statement that was used here in another lecture yesterday, Erich Fromm understood the connection between authoritarian religion versus humanitarian religion. So it all has to do which emphasis you have. Is the emphasis on life or is the emphasis on death? And the emphasis of life means the emphasis on the body, on the human body. That's the bottom line. It's all about the human body. It's the concrete, the corporeal entity. That's what you have to work. And where we are right now with warfare and everything else is the dehumanization, profound dehumanization that leads all of us to become data. If we all become data, there's no need for our body. Then our bodies can really be dismissed. So that I would suggest a good framework, and I would love to get hold of your lecture. It was superb. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, one thing that I was going to talk about and then left it out because it's not something that I know particularly a lot about, but I find specifically alarming. It's something that we cover in my law and armed conflict class, is the prospect of super soldiers, of enhanced super soldiers, enhanced through implants, sort of neurological implants, through chemical agents, that kind of thing. And I think that this is particularly alarming, and I think you're right that this framing of kind of this intersection of biology and data is something that we have to be aware that states are doing. So several years ago, just before the pandemic in 2019, I attended a talk by the then Minister of Defense here in Canada. And he was, along with some other people from his department, were advertising on our campus and other ones a competition, a granting competition called Ideas. And the Ideas program is still running to this day. And what he was basically telling us was that the Ideas program is meant to fund scientific research that will overcome, and he didn't put it this way, but he meant it this way, I think, overcoming the frailties of the human body, of the human soldier. So basically research that would allow soldiers to be able to think faster, go longer periods without eating, sleeping, to have more effective cognition, and in anticipating this link between humans and machines, in the anticipation that AI-enabled machines will become so complicated and so fast and so opaque that human operators will not understand what they're doing. The only way for human soldiers, at least, to interact with them is to have neural implants so that they can communicate with each other seamlessly. And so this is something that myself and a partner from anthropology, we had shown up. We thought maybe would apply for this money. And we decided not to, A, because it was really pitched at the engineers and the roboticists, and B, we were so incredibly disturbed by what the military was asking for that we decided not to do it. And so I think this kind of prospect of having this kind of future form of the kind of cyborgization of humans in the civilian world and in the military world, it's something that's going to be sometime in the future, but it's not a crazy kind of thing. Another thing I was thinking of putting into the talk, but I also didn't have enough time, is this very extensive brain science research that DARPA and others are are engaging in. And it's really meant to try to figure out, among other things, how you can tailor make psychological operations, some kinds of toxicological forms of weapons, and other kinds of offensive and defensive capabilities meant to attack particular kinds of, in the case of this one scholar, James Giordano, to be able to create purpose-built weapons that are designed to attack, as he called it, specific ethnic groups. So I think your concern here is exactly right. I thank you very much for that framing. I think that's exceptionally useful. Thank you so much.
There's a question in the Q&A. I'll just read it so that everyone online can hear it as well. Are there organizations or NGOs forming or formed that are examining the need for national and global guardrails outside of the business infrastructure of AI? Do you believe that they will be effective?
The only one, because I've been mostly working in the law of armed conflict space and with lethal autonomous weapons, the one that I know about is called the Stop Killer Robots campaign, which has been around for quite some time. I think they got started in 2011. There are several roboticists. The main one, Noel Sharkey, who is behind the attempt to come up with a ban on the development and use of lethal autonomous weapon systems, that is, fully autonomous weapon systems. This project has gained a lot of attention. They put out several years ago a very effective video in which they showed a hypothetical circumstance under which a kind of armed opposition group releases into the air a whole bunch of kind of quadcopter style drones that then fly to what looks like a high school. They enter the high school. The kids are all sitting in an auditorium listening to some kind of talk. And then it looks like there are individual children, they're high schoolers, who are targeted by individual drones. So it's a terrifying, very effective video. So what the Stop Killer Robots people have done is to try to work through the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, to assist states in negotiating an additional protocol to the Certain Conventional Weapons Treaty that would place this kind of ban I was talking about on the advent of fully autonomous lethal weapons. Now, unfortunately, there have been negotiations periodically between states under the auspices of the ICRC to create this kind of protocol. Unfortunately, it has been completely unsuccessful. And this is because, as with a lot of international law, and I teach an international law course and also the LOAC course, as with a lot of international law, states that don't have these kinds of weapon systems and are not going to ever have the capacity to develop them, of course, are the ones who have showed up session after session to basically try to negotiate this ban. But states who already have autonomous weapon systems and who they say that they would like to have this kind of retention of human control. When it all comes down to it, not that many of them are actually willing to have really hard and fast language that would amount to a ban. So unfortunately, that whole process has not been successful. I'm not even can't quite remember when their last negotiating session was. But it hasn't been that effective. Other than that, that's the only NGO I know of that's doing that kind of work. I would not be surprised if there are NGOs elsewhere that may be in the civilian realm or trying to work on the same kind of thing, but I do not know what they are. And if there isn't one, then you should create one. I would join it.
Anything else?
Thank you.
So great, Maureen. If you don't mind, since we have a little bit more time left, I'll throw out a few more quick things to you and see if you have some thoughts. One is, I did want to note that one of the environmental problems that's being caused by AI is not just water use, but water heating. And so what happens a lot is, because the temperatures are so huge, the coolant systems are actually pumping very hot water back into the environment, which is a direct accelerator of global warming. So that's another thing to think about. And thinking about your comments about that if AI systems are sort of controlling the environmental impact of AI, that's another potentially annihilative feature, right? Because if you're not concerned about stopping global warming, whatever your calculus is, if it's about AI efficiency and not human life, then you can get into a really difficult situation. So I thought your comments are really important that way, and we should really take that seriously as well. I did want to ask, I'll throw out a few things and then get your comments, I guess. One is, I'm not sure that right now so-called democracies and so-called non-democracies are very different in the level of autonomous AI that they're developing. Israel's autonomous drones are a good example. The US has a lot of autonomous weaponry, but other things as well. And I would actually argue that in democracies, that might be more of a risk. Whereas in a society where there's less sort of direct personal level resistance to authority, automation and AI autonomy actually provide a more useful contrast with a population that might be resistant. And that's what I worry about, especially in the US, combined with social media and other things, that this will sort of just marginalize your dissent won't matter because it's not even part of the process anymore, which I think is where you're really emphasizing already. The other thing, one other thing I would raise is, and this might be a positive thing, I think it's a positive thing, is that most AI discussions equivocate on the word intelligence. AI, and I have not, and I'm working on something on this right now. AI is not human intelligence. It's not the same thing. It's a different kind of intelligence.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and I always think of the Terminator movies and so forth. One of the things that we do, one of the things that we do is humanize AI and attribute to it the kinds of motives and so forth that human beings have. And for genocide scholars, those are pretty horrible motives that we keep going back to. So I was wondering if that might offer some alternative. I mean, I think, would I rather have Trump or Claude running the US right now? And for me, it's pretty easy. I'm not sure. It's a good question. But anyway, we have just a couple minutes left. Would you want to comment on any of that or have thoughts on any of that?
Sure. I mean, I'll take the first one and then I'll respond to the last one. So the first one is a huge problem. It will that this is the kind of reintroduction or introduction into the environment, this kind of use water that is exceptionally hot. One of the things that's happening in my province, I'm in the province of Alberta. This is just north of Montana. In the most northern part of the province, the provincial government and private industry are wanting to build a giant data center there. And the thesis is that because this is just below the Arctic Circle, it's very cold there for most of the year, and that this is the natural environment for most of the year is going to keep this data center cool. But nonetheless, there is concern about exactly what Henry said. And so for local communities, especially local First Nations, their concern is that the watershed will be absolutely destroyed. And of course, the Arctic in Canada is warming faster than any other part of the world. And so this will have an even kind of more devastating effect than climate change is already having up north. The last thing about oh no, I totally lost my train of thought and I've forgotten what your last question, your last comment was. Oh, right. Would we rather have Trump than Claude? I think that we cannot know this because, you know, once we have something that's like artificial general intelligence, then we kind of lose this capacity to fully understand how it is and why it is that autonomous systems will make the decisions that they do. I think you're exactly right that a lot of it now is going to depend on how AI systems are trained. So if they are trained on the best kind of data, the kind that is shorn as much as possible from the kind of bias that you talked about, then we have a better chance of having AI systems to be able to learn through machine learning and their capacity for that kind of autonomous decision making, to be able to learn to engage in more kind of, shall we say, ethical kind of governance or an activity. But I don't think that's necessarily an assured thing. And so, like, my concern is the unknowability at this point of what ultimately AIs will do and will not do, and what will govern them and what won't. And so I'm not really I don't really know how to address the last question or last point that you made, because I'm skeptical that an AI agent that even now, say like Anthropic, you know, has its constitution, right, for its AI agents. Once an AI agent becomes more fully autonomous, then it will actually kind of rewrite that kind of foundational programming over and over again. One of the scholars here at the University of Calgary, Ed Gent, basically says that machine learning will become what he calls survival of the fittest. And so the machine itself will kind of entertain a whole bunch of different kinds of possibilities. And then it somehow, in ways that I don't understand, will, I guess, pick what the next version of its foundational rules will be. But this will be something that it will just do internal without us. So I think this is a fraught area, to say the least.
Thank you, Maureen. It was great to have you. It's great to have you at Genocide Awareness Week finally. And as someone who grew up in Alberta, you ended on the most Alberta thing possible with how you said they're planning this, and I'd seen this in the news, and global warming, genocide, environmental racism, right? Like with these being built with on the lands of First Nations people in Alberta, Black and brown neighborhoods here in the US. Memphis is a good example. So, there's a lot of ethical issues with this. So thank you for engaging that, and appreciate you.
Great. Thank you for having me.